So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. We are going to take up lecture number 11, and in this lecture I am going to talk about a very important aspect of soft skill. In fact, we always believe that soft skills are superficial skills that we learn and that in turn make us successful in our personal and professional lives. But when we dive deeper into Indian knowledge system, we believe that it is not a superficial act, rather it is something that forms part of our consciousness, cognition and becomes a part of permanent nature. So, in this lecture particularly we are going to talk about self knowledge, which is Ātma-jñāna and personality development. So, time and again we have been told that knowing oneself in the real sense is the real knowledge. Unfortunately, we do not know what is our true self, and we believe that our superficial self, which is always governed by superficial or the events that take place around us, we believe that that is our true nature, but then that is not the case. Let us talk about it. One of the best examples of how little we know about ourselves, although all of us have infinite possibilities. As humans, there are a lot of potentials that lie dormant within us, unless either we realize through reflection or are made to realize by our mentors, coaches or the wise people. One of the examples is the forgotten self by Lord Hanuman before the leap. How often do we sit before the ocean of our own life and interview, a difficult conversation, a leadership role, a crisis and suddenly feel small? All of us know that Hanuman has been entrusted with a responsibility to cross the ocean and go to Laṅkā and to find out the whereabouts of Mata Sita. Hanuman does not know whether he will be able to cross the ocean, and so for a moment he stops and also suspects his own ability. His pause before the leap to Laṅkā is not a lack of ability, it is a profound crisis of self recognition. Hanuman himself does not know how much he possesses, and that is the reason he doubts his own ability. Now, this might happen with many of us. We have seen it happening in games and sports, where a great player doubting his own ability has not performed up to mark couple of times, which has dented his confidence or her confidence forever. And then suddenly coaches advise to concentrate on their ability rather than the situations that are out of their control, has charismatically helped them come out of that abyss and again perform what they were thinking impossible. So, at this decisive moment when Hanuman pauses, doubts his own ability, the obstacle before him is not merely the physical ocean, but the temporary eclipse of inner awareness. It is not the ocean that challenges him, but he is also challenged by the cobwebs in his own cognition, in his own mind, where he is not aware of himself. Though endowed with extraordinary courage, intelligence, speed and strategic insight, he momentarily loses conscious access to these very strengths. This might happen to all of us, friends. There are moments of crisis when we do not realize our real potential and are momentarily carried away by the situation. So, often in life the problem is the failure to recognize and inhabit one's own latent strengths. Well, if we realize who we are in the real sense of the term, probably the outside agencies will affect us less. So, this is where Ātma-jnāna enters the discourse of personality development. Who is considered a balanced personality? Who is considered a strong, stable personality? Someone who possesses this rare quality of persevering even during the moments of crisis. So, human potential often remains inaccessible until the self becomes visible to itself. So, many a time we do not realize our inner strength and get carried away by outside happenings or events that sometimes weaken us. What happens in this case? When Lord Hanuman fails to realize who he is, and all of us know about that classic curse that has befallen him, and as a result he has forgotten about himself. But later on he has also been told that if somebody reminds you of your prowess, that will be restored. So, in this case Jamwant reminds him who he really is. राम काज लगी तब अवतारा सुनत ही भयउ पर्वताकारा. The moment he says that you have been born for service of Lord Rama, suddenly he realizes his true potential and he takes a gigantic proportion. The moment his identity is reawakened through Jamwant's words, his personality expands symbolically into Parvatakara, mountain like magnitude. The transformation is not bodily alone, it is the expression of confidence, mindset and executive presence. So, friends, whenever we are in the moments of crisis and we do not realize our true potential, at that point in time some wise counsel, some mentorship, some wiser person makes us realize our true potential, and that revives our confidence and the inner essence that we have failed to recognize. So, Jamwant does not teach Hanuman a new ability, instead he asks him in effect, have you forgotten who you are? So, it is not that your mentors, your guides, your coaches create new ability in you, rather they make you realize the potential that you have, and that takes you out of the abyss of incredibility or lack of confidence into believing in your abilities. So, Hanuman's lip becomes the perfect metaphor for self belief, initiative, courage in execution, performance confidence, leadership readiness. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins with a single question, do I truly know my own strength? Now, this question everybody has to ask. All of us are unique individuals endowed with immense potential. The fact is, some of us realize our true potential and some of us do not realize our true potential, and that makes all the difference in our performance. The second instance we can think of, and I have often referred to that, Yaksh Yudhishthira Sambad. Now, what happens when our self knowledge is under some kind of crisis? Atmaiva hayatmano bandhuratmaiva ripuratmanah. For the self alone is one's friend and the self alone is one's enemy. Our enemies are not outside, it is our own self that makes an enemy or a friend, it is a state of mind. The Yaksh episode places Yudhishthira in one of the most intense psychological and ethical tests in the Mahabharata. We find in episode 39 that the Pandavas are about to complete their banvas of 12 years, and at that point in time, in that intense jungle, they are feeling very thirsty. Now, Yudhishthira sends his brothers one by one to fetch water. They go to a unique nearby lake, but then they are cautioned by some invisible power not to drink from that unless and until they have responded to the questions of that voice. Now, 4 of the brothers do not pay much attention to that, and despite caution drink from the lake, which makes them dead. Yudhishthira, realizing that his brothers have not come back, decides to go there himself. Now, he is also cautioned by that voice, to which he responds very politely and says, "You please give your darshan, please appear before me, for me to be able to listen to you and respond to your questions." Now, it is a moment of crisis. He finds that his brothers are all dead there. He himself is dying of thirst, but at this point in time he is obliged to answer Yaksha's questions first before he could drink from the lake. This scene is charged with urgency, grief, uncertainty, and the immediate temptation to respond impulsively. Friends, such situations are nothing new when your life is in deeper crisis and still you have to maintain your equilibrium. You have to take care of that situation and deal with it with utmost caution and lot of peace and intellectual balance. So, Yudhishthira's response is extraordinarily precise because he resists the tyranny of immediacy. He pauses, attends, listens to Yaksha's voice, reflects upon the questions, and only then responds. So, there will be moments where you will be in a deeper crisis and you may be compelled to take impulsive decisions, reckless decisions, but that is the real test of your self. A person who is strong, balanced, emotionally controlled is the person who will be able to respond to that situation after giving it enough thought and musing over it. So, Yudhishthira demonstrates that the strongest personality in crisis is rarely the most aggressive voice. It is the one capable of holding emotional turbulence without surrendering cognitive clarity. So, if you want to be a good professional, a strong, wise man, you must learn to hold your emotions in your trying moments and think rationally and reasonably before taking your decision or responding to that crisis. So, the self becomes either the ally that stabilizes us or the enemy that sabotages judgment. In crisis, the first battlefield is always internal. We are not fighting the situation, rather we are fighting our own self, and somebody who can take control of his or her inner turmoil is the somebody who can really take a rational decision. So, Ātma-jnāna, knowing self the Indian way. What is this Ātma-jnāna? Is it knowing oneself superficially? Whenever we are asked to introduce ourselves, we say I am so and so, I have studied in so and so university and I am interested in so and so. Is that Ātma-jnāna? No, knowing about oneself, the superficial physiological self, is not what we call Ātma-jñāna. It goes deeper than that. It is knowing one's inner nature, one's Atma, one's spiritual and psychological strengths. So, ko aham, मैं कौन हूँ? This question is paramount in Indian knowledge system. In the Indian knowledge tradition, Atma-jnana is not information about the self, as I just said, but insight into the nature of the self itself. So, what constitutes myself? Well, there can be several Nagendra Kumars, but how am I different? What makes me the Nagendra Kumar I think myself to be? Is it simply a name? If it is simply a name, then anybody bearing this name may be denoted by this name. The Upaniṣadic vision repeatedly distinguishes between the body we inhabit, the mind we experience, and the ego we perform, and the witness consciousness that observes all three. So, it is a rare combination of body, mind, ego, and that witness consciousness. So, we do not only talk about the sthul sarira, that is physiology, we also talk about sukshma sarira, that is the inner consciousness. What am I beyond role, emotion, status and performance? Well, am I simply a role? Am I simply a particular kind of emotion? Is a status me? Is performance me? Indian thought calls this deeper center Atma, the witnessing self, the stable consciousness beneath changing roles, emotions and social identities. Friends, the body is the self, and the changing clothes, attires and makeups that we wear for different roles, for different occasions is our fleeting self, that is for that particular moment, that particular occasion, but the body remains the same. It can be understood like this: this body itself is the dressing of our self, the true self, Atma. So, Atma-jnana begins when a person stops confusing the self with temporary states. Fear is not the self, failure is not the self, praise is not the self. These are fleeting emotions that come and go. If they have an impact on us forever, our personality will be changed forever, but it does not happen. These are passing experiences and we forget them with time. This differs from many modern frameworks that define personality through traits alone. Indian thought instead sees personality as an expression of inner alignment. We do not talk about personality in the sense of how we express ourselves. We also talk about our inner strength, our inner alignment. Where the inner self is forgotten, confidence collapses into insecurity, communication becomes defensive, decisions become impulsive and leadership becomes egoic. So, if we are always governed by and controlled and affected by these ever changing situations, obviously we will not be able to take decisions that are not based on real consideration, that are affected by these fleeting fancies or the different kinds of impressions on us. This is why Atma-jnana becomes the root of soft skills. In Greek philosophy, the Delphic injunction, know thyself, performs a similar function, urging self-examination before action. In Buddhist thought, mindfulness similarly trains awareness of thought and response. But the Indian insight adds a distinctive layer. The self is not merely psychological content, but the witnessing awareness that can regulate it, uniquely powerful for personality development. Whatever we do, there is one self that looks at it, judges it, and then learns from it, and decides whether we are doing it right or wrong. So, why Ātma-jnāna is so important in soft skills? When we talk about soft skills, they are usually discussed in the language of communication, efficiency, teamwork, negotiation, leadership, adaptability, confidence, workplace behavior. Modern frameworks often treat these as discrete competencies to be trained separately. A module on leadership, a workshop on communication, a course on stress management. This is what they believe can change one's thinking and personality, but it does not happen. In Indian thought, by contrast, we do not see them as isolated behavioral techniques, but as organic expressions of inner clarity. From an Indian perspective, the deeper problem does not originate in speech, conflict or failure as external phenomena, but in the consciousness, ego structure, sense of self through which these experiences are processed. So, soft skills become transformative only when they arise not from performance pressure, but from the clarity of a well understood self. This is precisely why Ātma-jnāna matters in the age of burnout, performance networking, digital comparison. If that self is stable, it will not be affected by these fleeting fancies or the temporary changes in situations. How can we cultivate this kind of Ātma-jnāna, knowing oneself? Tad vidhati pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upadechanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. What does that mean? Know that through humility, inquiry and disciplined engagement, the wise who have seen the truth will guide you into knowledge. So, Indian philosophical traditions do not treat self knowledge as a sudden mystical event alone, but as a disciplined threefold practice. How we can cultivate Atma-jnana? It is through Śravaṇa, that is listening to truth, Manana, that is reflecting upon that truth, and then Nididhyāsana, that is internalizing truth through contemplative assimilation. We listen to the truth, we reflect upon it, and we make it part of our understanding and being. This movement is intellectually profound because it mirrors the actual structure of human transformation. So, our human transformation does not happen just by listening to somebody, gathering information, but also reflecting upon that information, deciding whether that information is true or false, believing that that information can be realized and made use of in the real sense, and then making it part of our thinking, contemplation and action. So, it goes like this: information leads to reflection to embodiment. The self is not transformed merely by exposure to wisdom, it changes when insight becomes lived cognition. It insists that knowledge must descend from cognition into being. So, friends, just by going through this course you will not become a master of soft skills, rather going through this course you will get some knowledge, insight, information which you will think over and then will use it in your real life, practical life, and then you will really become proficient in soft skills. So, what are these three phases that we talked about? Śravaṇa, the discipline of listening; Shraddhavan labhate jnanam tatpara sanjatendriyah, the one endowed with receptivity and disciplined attention attains knowledge. Knowledge cannot be gained with a fleeting mind, it requires attention, it requires commitment. In the classical Indian tradition, this is referred to listening to the Upanishads, the Guru and Shastric wisdom. Yet philosophically its significance is far deeper than scriptural reception alone. Just listening to scriptures is not enough. Trying to understand it, trying to make it part of our cognition or behavior is what brings about that kind of profound impact and transformation in our self. So, Śravaṇa represents the ethical willingness to encounter a truth that unsettles one's habitual identity. So, if we listen to the truth and are ready to change our belief, obviously that truth works, that listening works. In contemporary life, Śravaṇa translates directly into listening to feedback without defensiveness, receiving difficult truths about one's behavior, active listening in teams, conflict de-escalation through attentive presence, openness to perspectives beyond one's ego, cross cultural sensitivity. So, listening that is not colored in our own biases, listening that tries to get to the root of the things, looks at it objectively in order to come to a conclusion. The first soft skill is not expression but receptivity, the courage to hear what can transform the self. And that is why Kabir Das ji also says, Nindak niyare rakhiye angan kuti chhawai. If you really want to mold yourself, you must listen to honest criticism, must have courage to listen to that, introspect and change if that change is needed in your actions and emotions. The second thing is Manana. First we listen to the truth, then we reflect upon that. It leads to self examination. Be misrai tad seshena yathekshasi tatha kuru. That means knowledge must not merely be received, it must be examined, interrogated and made personally intelligible. Friends, whether knowledge is tenable, whether that knowledge is relevant, whether that knowledge is true, for that we need to examine it, not to just accept whatever is given. So, if Śravaṇa opens the life to truth, Manana tests that truth against the lived structure of one's behavior, reactions and identity patterns. Manana is the discipline through which experience ceases to be accidental and becomes intelligible. The importance of Manana lies in the fact that it prevents wisdom from remaining external. Without reflection, advice stays informational. With reflection, it becomes revelatory. Friends, we as teachers teach in the class, you listen to that. Now, that does not become part of your knowledge unless and until you put that knowledge to some kind of scrutiny and then come to realize that that knowledge really brings about transformative changes in your behavior or your thinking. So, Manana is very, very important. Indian thought recognizes that human suffering and behavioral limitation often arise not from events themselves, but from the interpretive frameworks through which the self processes those events. It is the critical examination of the assumptions, beliefs and ego structures that silently govern behavior, and they are the ones that give us wisdom. When we approach a problem methodologically, we look at it impassionately rather than being in a hurry, being governed by our emotions, impulses, then only we will be able to take right decisions. And then it leads to Nididhyāsana, from insight to embodied behavior. What we have listened to, what we have reflected upon, now how we make it part of our thinking and behavior. If Śravaṇa is receptive listening and Manana is reflective interrogation, Nididhyāsana is the point at which insight begins to reorganize one's habitual mode of being. It brings about the real changes in our self understanding and the understanding of outside world. It must not be reduced to meditation in a narrow, purely ritualistic sense. Philosophically, Nididhyāsana signifies the sustained assimilation of truth until it becomes one's spontaneous cognitive and behavioral orientation. It becomes part of your nature. Yato yato nischarati manas chanchalam isthiram tatas tato nyamai tadat maniveva basam nayet. That means, wherever the restlessness and unsteady mind wanders, one should repeatedly bring it back under the governance of the self. If you are able to control your chanchal chit, that is your wandering self, and bring your mind to that point where it is stable and not governed by these fleeting fancies, obviously you have known yourself. Many individuals intellectually understand emotional regulation, ethical communication and leadership values. Yet in moments of stress, conflict or ego threat, behavior reverts to deeply conditioned patterns. We are given management lessons how to control our emotions in the times of crisis, how to behave in a particular situation, how to act, how to react, but when the actual situation comes, all this theoretical knowledge goes for a toss and we are not able to keep our calm. Indian philosophy recognizes this gap between cognitive assent and existential embodiment, and that is why calls for deeper understanding of the self, which is not governed by these fleeting moments, but is stable, rock stable, and helps us maintain our composure even in the moments of crisis. Aham and Ahaṃkāra, selfhood, ego and personality, at its most basic level, aham signifies the immediate sense of I, the felt center of experience through which one perceives things, acts and relates to the world. In itself, this sense of I is not problematic, rather it is necessary for agency, responsibility and worldly functioning. There is no problem with this I, but the issue arises when this functional sense of self hardens into Ahaṃkāra, literally the process of I making. In Sankhya thought, Ahaṃkāra is described as the principle through which pure consciousness becomes entangled with individuality and begins to identify with body, mind, status and social roles. It is the mistaken assumption that the transient structures of personality are identical with the true self. When your own self is determined by your status, your position, your name and fame in the society, and it takes over your actual nature, there is a problem that leads to arrogance, Ahaṃkāra. The pure sense of I am gradually shifts into narrower formulations. I am my title, my authority, my expertise, my success, my recognition. One's identity becomes over invested in these external forms, personality itself becomes fragile. So, when you are governed by these superficial external titles, obviously you do not remain true to yourself. A person whose sense of self is tied excessively to praise, control or status often becomes defensive under criticism, insecure in collaboration and resistant to feedback. So, Indian philosophy invites a subtle but transformative moment to retain the functional I necessary for action while loosening the egoic fixation that turns roles and achievements into the whole of one's being. So, you retain your real self, do not let it be carried away by your titles. By recognizing this distinction, one develops a more stable and mature personality marked by humility, resilience, authentic confidence and openness to correction. So, the question is not whether the I exists, but whether it serves awareness or merely protects illusion. Ātma-jñāna, mental health and crisis of the modern self. The contemporary age is marked by unprecedented connectivity and equally unprecedented inner fragmentation. Hyper competition, digital comparison, performative success, social isolation and identity tied excessively to productivity have created a fragile psychological landscape in which anxiety, burnout and depression increasingly shape everyday life. Depression today is among the most common mental health conditions worldwide, significantly affecting work, relationships and self-worth. Now, we need to look at the circumstances or the thought processes that lead to this kind of behavior or feeling. When identity collapses into unstable markers, as I said, like achievement, failure, social validation, public image, comparison, external recognition, every setback feels existential. Failure becomes not an event, but a verdict on being. Nowadays, friends, unfortunately the world is being threatened by this menace. We measure our success in terms of the likes we receive on our posts. We always seek validation from others about whatever we do. Failing to get that, we believe that our life is meaningless. Many people suffer depression so much that they end their lives, and this happens because they do not know who they really are, what their true self is. So, Ātma-jñāna invites the individual to rediscover a deeper center of awareness that is not exhausted by performance, praise or loss. Philosophically, this does not deny pain, rather it creates an inner witnessing space from which pain can be observed without allowing it to consume the whole identity. What if the field be lost, all is not lost. That is what Saturn says in Paradise Lost Book 1. The indomitable self and will never to succumb. Well, if we are internally strong, the setbacks will not break us completely. We of course will face setback, but will have courage to bounce back. So, this movement from total identification to reflective distance can become a powerful support for emotional resilience and recovery. At the same time, it is important to recognize that depression and severe mental distress require professional psychological and medical support, community care and compassionate social environments. If you suffer this kind of a situation, you must take help from all the concerned people, but at the same time should also think yourself how you can make yourself strong, how you can realize your inner strength to fight it out. Ātma-jñāna should therefore be understood not as a replacement for mental health treatment, but as a philosophical resource for inner stability, meaning and self compassion. So, this is all, friends. These are the bibliography. I believe our understanding of Ātma-jñāna and personality development certainly will help us fight the crises that are part of our professional life and provide us a better solution and alternative to our problems that are mostly not concerning our own inner self, but that are governed and dictated by the surrounding reality, external reality, which can be easily ignored as well. So, thank you very much. In the next class, we will talk about emotional balance, which is so important, and till then, thank you very much. I look forward to your company. Thank you.